Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Hey, for those of you who've been nice enough to geek out with us here on the channel for the last few months, you know we've spent a lot of time talking about the Washington State Legislature and everything they're doing out here. And we've been talking even more about the ATF and everything they're doing all around the country with all their new creative interpretations of laws that have been on the books for decades. Both of these entities, the state of Washington and the ATF, have spent a lot of time and energy going after you, the lawful and responsible gun owner, and it's gotten a lot of our attention, it's drawn a lot of our ire, and we've spent a lot of energy focusing on that. But behind the scenes, there is a much more sinister war being waged, and one that we need to talk about today because I do need to make all of you aware of it. So today, let's spend a few minutes and talk about the war being waged on FFLs nationwide. Okay, before we get rolling, you guys know the drill. If you like this video, click that like button. If you want to stay up to date on issues related to this kind of stuff, click that subscribe button. Click the little bell logo if you want to be notified when we post new videos. And let's keep the comments and discussions coming. That's how we're making sure we're getting our videos out to more folks. Okay, so what drew my attention to this topic was actually an article that I read on AmmoLand.com. And if you guys really want to do a good job of keeping up to date on legislative issues nationwide, AmmoLand.com does an excellent job of it. But it's about a new piece of legislation, House Bill 1021 out of the state of Maryland. Now, for those of you who have understandings of how gun laws work nationwide, you will know that the state of Maryland has long since abandoned any notion of a Second Amendment in their state, but apparently there's more still to take because the Senate and House has passed this House Bill 1021. It's heading to the governor's desk for signature. And let's talk for a minute about what this does, because I think what this bill does, and we recently did a video about why everyone nationwide needs to pay attention to Washington gun laws. And I'm going to kind of expand upon that theory here for a moment, okay? Because I think that when you go to these really deep blue states, you can see where the future of gun control lies, because these are the little test bubbles for all this. And Maryland is no exception to that. We've talked about how Washington's House Bill 1705 on the lower receivers, unfinished frames and receivers, untraceable firearms, basically mirrors the exact language that the feds are now kicking around as it relates to ATF regulations on unfinished frames and receivers. So they will throw their cards down on the table somewhere so that you can see them. And I want you to pay attention to what they're doing here. And then I want to talk to you about what I think the bigger issue is and where the common thread is. Okay, so I'm going to read off my little cheat sheet here. But House Bill 1021, if signed into law, which we expect it will be, requires all licensed firearm dealers to have video surveillance and burglary alarm systems covering the premises. Okay. And bars, security screens, commercial-grade metal doors, grates, or other approved barriers on all doors and windows. If practicable, they are to have physical barriers to prevent ramming by vehicles. It also requires dealers to lock away all firearms outside of business hours in vaults, safes, or rooms with all security features above. Now, I am sure that there are many FFLs nationwide that have physical structures designed exactly like that. The two FFLs that I use most frequently when doing paperwork on firearms, I know for a fact, I can say at least physically the structure is there. I don't know what they're doing with their firearms after hours because I don't hang out there after hours. But that's just a couple of FFLs that I know here locally. I know a few other FFLs locally here in Washington State that there's no way that their buildings would comply with that. Now, you take a look at what's going on in Maryland. Here's what's going on in Maryland, and it's not that unique to Maryland, because when you take a look at what the ATF is doing when it comes to unfinished frames and receivers, when you take a look at what the ATF is doing to all Form 1 manufacturers, Form 1 kits, all of that, when you take a look at what the ATF is doing when it comes to the forced reset trigger, when you take a look at what the ATF is doing when it comes to AR pistols or the SBRs, when you take a look at what the state of Maryland is doing in this situation, When you take a look at what the state of Washington did in House Bill 1705, you will see that although there is a huge burden placed upon you and me, the lawful and responsible gun owner nationwide, there is an immense burden placed upon the FFL industry nationwide. There is an immense amount of further regulations that are going to be placed upon FFLs nationwide. There is a tremendous amount of new requirements and procedural steps that are going to have to be in place. And there is a tremendous amount of cost associated with all of that. The cost of conducting business as an FFL is going to go up exponentially. Why? Because the federal government and in many instances state governments are making that mandatory through regulation. And that's the common theme that I'm beginning to see with a lot of this ATF enforcement efforts. Take, for example, the video we just did about the ATF hiring a bunch of new agents. Well, we said that in President Biden's request for $20.6 billion, yes, with a B, billion dollars, that he was going to ask for 300 new agents, but 160 of them were dedicated solely to investigating FFLs nationwide. When you take a look at all the engraving requirements, both found out here in Washington State in House Bill 1705 and found in the proposed federal legislation currently kicking around in Washington, D.C., you will see the immense cost, burden, and here's the other thing, liability that is being shoved onto the FFL industry. And what you're going to see, because they are for-profit businesses and they have every right in the world to run their business however they wish, is that some of them simply will not be allowed to remain in business. They are going to get priced right out of the industry. I guarantee when it comes to engraving lower receivers, whether you're here in Washington State or you end up having to do it somewhere else in the country, the amount of regulations and red tape that they're going to place on the FFLs who do that, the amount of liability that the FFL will subject themselves to, the amount of scrutiny from the ATF that they will subject themselves to, there simply will not be a cost that makes it worth it to them. And if there was a cost, it's one that you or I simply are not going to be willing to pay. And so why, folks, nationwide, we get so spun up and we get so worried about the obvious frontal attack that we have on our individual rights, our God-given rights. What we fail to see, unless you're in the industry or you're paying attention, is that there is an immense war underway in the FFL industry as well. And it is the FFL industry that is under siege right now, and it needs the assistance of all of us, the lawful and responsible gunner, not only in the state of Washington, but nationwide. It is my anticipation that this will be signed into law in Maryland, and then many other states of a similar color will be like, wow, that's a good idea. Let's try that next legislative session. I have no doubt in my mind that Washington's House Bill 1705 will become a model nationwide for other progressive gun measures, just as the creation of RCW 7.94 or red flag laws did years ago, now the model for the federal government. Listen, you may have more questions about your Second Amendment rights or what's left of them, and if you do, don't ever hesitate to contact us at WashingtonGunLaw.com, or of course you can call us directly at 425-765-0487. Now let's remember, part of being the lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here at Washington Gun Law, is to know what the law is in every situation and how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching, and stay safe.